I woke up to a mariachi band tuning their instruments under my maple tree. Not near it, under it. In my backyard. At 7:30 in the morning. One trumpet blared out a sour note that rattled my window, and that's when I realized something was very, very wrong. I pulled open my bedroom curtains and blinked at the surreal scene unfolding below me. White folding chairs were being lined up in neat rows on my freshly mowed lawn. A man in a tuxedo was arguing with a woman over the placement of a 3-tiered wedding cake. And there, center stage, was a makeshift wedding arch draped in gauzy fabric and fake roses, bolted directly into the ground, right where my vegetable patch used to be. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Then I saw Karen. Karen, my neighbor, head of the HOA's event committee, the woman who once reported me for using a hammock without prior approval, was standing dead center in the chaos, wearing a headset and barking orders like a budget wedding planner on a caffeine bender. She looked right at home in my backyard. Too at home. I marched downstairs, stepped into my slippers, and stormed out onto the deck. "Excuse me," I called down, voice just polite enough to keep the peace. "Why is there a wedding rehearsal happening in my backyard?" Karen didn't even flinch. She turned, cupped a hand to her mouth, and shouted, "Good morning. We're just doing a quick run-through before the real thing tomorrow. Hope you don't mind." "I absolutely do mind," I replied flatly. "This is my property." She blinked as if I had just said water was wet. "Oh, don't be so uptight. We're only using it for a few hours. It's not like you were doing anything with it." I looked at the grass that I personally trimmed the night before. The vegetable patch that took me 4 months to cultivate. My koi pond, which now had pink lilies floating on it. I stared back at her. "Karen, did you ask me? Or even tell me?" Her face twitched with what might have been guilt in a more functional human. "We assumed it'd be fine. The HOA approved it. That doesn't mean anything. You can't vote to use my private property like it's the community park." Karen waved dismissively and turned back to her chaos. "It's one day. One wedding. Don't be selfish." Selfish. That word rang in my ears as I stood there, dumbfounded. A woman had invaded my backyard, installed an entire wedding set, and told me I was selfish for not being thrilled about it. I should have exploded, called the cops, chased everyone off the property. But something stopped me. A little internal voice, the same one that whispers when you're about to make the most satisfying decision of your life, said, "Don't fight it. Not yet." Instead, I calmly asked, "And what makes you think I'll allow this tomorrow?" Karen smirked. "Because if you complain, the HOA can fine you for obstructing a community event. It's all in the bylaws." Now that was impressive. Not the legality of it, because it was absolutely illegal, but the audacity. The sheer, blazing, hallucinatory confidence. She really thought she could weaponize a suburban committee charter to hijack someone's backyard. I turned around and went back inside. Closed the door behind me. Sat at the kitchen table and stared at my coffee as if it could explain how I ended up in this alternate timeline where neighbors throw weddings on your property without permission and then dare you to do something about it. I spent the rest of the day observing. I didn't interfere. I didn't yell. I didn't even warn them. I watched folding tables appear. Watched lights being strung up across my treetops. Watched Karen's cousin park his van half on my lawn and half on my azaleas. I watched them drill holes into the lawn for tent stakes and watched a florist tip over one of my garden gnomes. It was like a slapstick comedy directed by Satan. By nightfall, the backyard looked like a Pinterest board exploded. Everything was white and gold and glittery, and every single detail reeked of budget elegance. The DJ tested the speakers. The caterer stacked chafing dishes. Karen walked around like the Queen of Versailles, if Versailles had been built on stolen soil and plastic chairs. But me? I smiled. Because I already knew what I was going to do. Not then. Not immediately. But tomorrow. During the ceremony. At the exact right moment. Because I wasn't just going to stop the wedding. I was going to make sure they never forgot whose land they were trespassing on. And I had just the creatures in mind to help me. By the time the last of Karen's bridal party left my yard that night, trailing glitter, cigarette butts, and 2 broken solar lights, I had already drafted the rough outline of a plan that would not only reclaim my land but burn their smug entitlement into HOA history forever. Not literally burn. That would be arson. But metaphorically? Oh, it was going to reek of justice. And a few other things. Karen's wedding, scheduled for the next afternoon, was to be the grandest social event of the HOA calendar. According to her, at least. She'd been boasting in the community newsletter for months about her rustic garden wedding. What she failed to mention was that the rustic garden in question didn't belong to her. It belonged to me. Now, to understand how Karen thought this was okay, you have to understand Karen. She's not just an entitled neighbor, she's the type who thinks boundaries are more of a polite suggestion than a legal concept. A woman who once tried to rearrange a neighbor's front porch furniture because it clashed with the HOA aesthetic. A woman who installed a community lending library that was just a repainted mailbox filled with old copies of Real Simple and expired coupons. She's also the kind of person who, upon realizing your property line is 5 feet further than she thought, starts organizing shared space events without asking. But what really cemented her descent into cartoon villainy was the discovery I made later that night. Curious, I grabbed a flashlight and walked the length of my fence line. Halfway along the back, just behind the hydrangeas, I found a section where the wood had been cut, neatly, surgically. A 2x2 panel had been removed entirely. It had been patched with a vinyl sheet painted to look like wood from a distance. Clever, if you're trying to fool a bat. Beyond the opening, a trampled path of footprints and wheel ruts led directly to Karen's property. So she hadn't just used my yard. She'd literally carved a tunnel between our lots. The next morning, I called my lawyer. Technically, it was a voicemail. He was golfing. But I left the facts clearly. Trespassing, unauthorized construction, property damage, and a potential case of forged HOA approval. Then I called the city zoning office to check for any permit. There were none. Then I went to see Dave. Dave is a wildlife removal specialist who lives 20 minutes out of town and has a reputation for being both eccentric and incredibly effective. He once trapped a raccoon infestation using marshmallows and dubstep music. His place smelled like cedar chips and something vaguely feral. When I explained my situation, he listened silently, then cracked the kind of smile that only a man with too much free time and a license to handle wildlife can manage. "How many you want?" he asked, gesturing toward a shed with air vents and warning signs. "Enough to make a memory," I said. By noon, I had 6 live traps lined up in the back of my truck, each containing a fully grown, very alert skunk. Dave assured me they hadn't been descented. "I keep it authentic," he said proudly. "You want a theatrical effect or tactical?" "Surprise theater," I replied. "Big crowd. Short burst." "Perfect," he nodded. "Keep 'em calm until showtime. Dark box, minimal noise. Release them gently and walk away. And for the love of God, don't open the traps while standing upwind." Back at my house, I set to work preparing the stage. I cleaned out the old garden shed at the back of the yard, the one Karen and her wedding planner had somehow missed. I reinforced the door, lined the inside with old rugs to muffle sound, and placed the skunk traps at the front, just out of sight behind some overturned flower pots. I ran a line of twine to the shed door, fed it through a pulley I'd bolted to a stake in the ground, and tied the end near my back deck. A single pull would open the shed and free the guests of honor. The rest of the day was surreal. My backyard became a circus. Karen's vendors arrived in waves. Photographers, florists, bartenders, a balloon arch installer who looked like he regretted all his life choices. The cake was delivered with great pomp, only to be stored in my garage because Karen's fridge is full. I said nothing, just smiled, waved, and watched. At one point, Karen approached me directly. She was wearing a robe, curlers in her hair, sipping from a champagne flute. "I hope you're planning to stay inside tomorrow," she said casually. "Wouldn't want to ruin the pictures." "Oh, don't worry," I said with the most neighborly tone I could summon. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." She gave me a suspicious glance, then clomped back to her bridal lair. As night fell, the backyard glowed with string lights and overdone fairy tale decor. My flower beds had been trampled by folding chairs. My koi pond had lily petals strewn over it like a used prom corsage. My oak tree was strung with lanterns zip-tied so tight the bark had started to split. It would all be worth it. Around 10 p.m., I stood out on my deck with a beer, staring at the yard I no longer recognized, and gently tugged the twine one final time to make sure the pulley system worked. The shed door creaked but didn't open fully. Just enough. I smiled. The next morning, Karen's guests began to arrive 2 hours early. White cars clogged the cul-de-sac. Someone parked half on my lawn again. A catering truck reversed straight into my mailbox. The DJ was blasting some pre-wedding mix of Ed Sheeran and soft jazz. I stayed inside, watching it all through the blinds, sipping coffee and waiting. At 3:13 p.m., the wedding began. The officiant took his place under the arch. Karen emerged from the side, wearing a poofy white dress that made her look like a weaponized meringue. The bridal march played. Phones rose to capture the moment. The air buzzed with mosquitoes and entitlement. I stepped onto my deck, tugged the twine, and let history unfold. The shed door creaked open. At first, nothing happened. Then the first skunk waddled out, tail high. Then the second. By the time the third appeared, a little girl pointed and shouted, "Kitty!" That was the last innocent moment of the day. The first scream came from a groomsman. Then the caterer dropped a tray of shrimp. A bridesmaid tried to climb a folding chair and fell into the cake. The DJ cut the music and screamed, "Skunks!" into the mic like it was a code word for apocalypse. Guests scattered. Some dove into the koi pond. Karen shrieked at the top of her lungs as one of the skunks trotted directly toward her. She tried to run, tripped on her gown, and landed face-first into the hydrangeas. I watched from the deck, arms crossed, expression neutral. Justice doesn't always wear a cape. Sometimes it wears black and white and smells like revenge. And for the record, the skunks weren't hurt. They just did what skunks do when surrounded by screaming, flailing humans. They sprayed. Liberally. By the time the last echo of the wedding march was drowned out by shrieks and the unmistakable scent of airborne regret, I was already backing away from the deck with the kind of calm you usually only see in villains during the final 5 minutes of a heist movie. My shed door stood wide open like Pandora's box, and 6 highly irritated skunks had taken the stage with more flair than the bride. I hadn't expected them to coordinate, but they moved with eerie synchronicity, weaving through chairs, waddling under tables, and issuing precision strikes on unsuspecting wedding guests like they were part of some elite olfactory SWAT team. Inside, I watched everything unfold from my living room window with a fresh cup of coffee and a GoPro livestream linked to my phone. I'd hidden 3 cameras in various garden gnomes, each one capturing a different angle. I knew I'd want evidence later, for court, for the internet, and mostly for myself. Because justice, while sweet, is even sweeter in 1080p with multiple angles. As the chaos bloomed like a flower made of screams and dry heaving, Karen did her best to salvage the moment. I'll give her credit. Even with a bouquet of peonies in one hand and a skunk circling her like a shark, she still tried to command the situation. "Don't panic," she shouted, voice cracking. "Remain calm. They're just little animals. They won't hurt you." Seconds later, one of the skunks reared up and unleashed a cloud directly into her face. Karen staggered backward, dropped the bouquet, and clawed at her eyes like she'd been pepper-sprayed. Her veil, now stained yellow and brown, floated gently down onto the koi pond. Guests began fleeing en masse, but not before destroying everything in their path. A man in a baby blue suit tripped over the buffet table and skidded across it like a fish on ice. Someone screamed, "I think it touched me," and dove into the azalea bushes. An elderly woman wielded a folding chair like a lion tamer trying to hold back the apocalypse. The balloon arch was taken out by a runaway toddler who slipped on spilled champagne and face-planted into the cake. And the smell. Even from inside my sealed house, it was unmistakable. Acrid. Penetrating. The kind of scent that gets into your sinuses and whispers, "You'll never be clean again." The DJ gave up all pretense of professionalism, abandoned his laptop, and ran screaming down the street. The speakers continued blaring Perfect by Ed Sheeran as Karen's dream day collapsed into what could only be described as a slapstick horror film with a $500 budget and a cast of community college rejects. But for me, the most beautiful part was that I never laid a finger on anyone. No violence. No shouting. Just a gentle pull of a rope and the careful application of nature's most pungent revenge artists. About 20 minutes in, the police arrived, 2 cars, lights on, windows down. They took one step into the yard and both officers froze, recoiling from the wall of scent that hit them. One actually gagged. The other asked if there had been a chemical spill. I calmly stepped out and waved. "Officers," I said politely, "can I help you?" They looked from me to the carnage. Karen was lying on the lawn, surrounded by sobbing bridesmaids, covered in what I hoped was just punch and regret. One of the groomsmen was using my garden hose to blast his shoes. The skunks had vanished, probably hiding under the deck or waddling off to tell tales of battle. The taller cop squinted at me. "Is this your property?" "Yes," I said. "All of it." "What happened here?" "Looks like a trespassing issue," I said, straight-faced. "A large group of people broke into my backyard, set up an unauthorized wedding, and got sprayed by some local wildlife. Tragic, really. Did you call animal control?" "I didn't have to. They were already here," I said, and gestured toward the shed. 6 wild skunks. None of them invited. But then, neither was I. That got a blink from the cop. He started scribbling in his notepad. Karen, now sitting up and looking like a melted candle, tried to rally. "He did this," she shouted, voice hoarse and soaked in fury. "He planted those monsters. This is his fault." "You hosted a wedding in his backyard?" the officer asked, looking increasingly skeptical. "We had HOA approval," she snapped, then promptly vomited into a potted fern. I pulled out my phone and opened the city property map. "Here's the parcel," I said, showing it to the officer. "My land. All of it. There's no easement, no shared usage. And if you check that shed camera right there, you'll see the fence line was cut 3 days ago. Without my knowledge." The officer nodded slowly. "You want to press charges?" "I think I'd like to start with a trespassing report," I said pleasantly. "And then we can move on to property damage, illegal use of private land, destruction of landscaping, and unlawful assembly. But I'm happy to let the city building inspector get the final word. I hear they love weddings on unpermitted structures." The shorter cop grinned. "You got cameras?" "Oh yes," I said. "Would you like me to email the footage?" "Please do," he said. That night, the video was uploaded to a private YouTube channel and sent to my lawyer. But a version of it, tighter, with music labeled Karen's Backyard Wedding vs. Nature's Fury, made it onto Reddit by morning, thanks to my cousin Dave, who's a bit of a meme lord. Within 12 hours, it had 2 million views. Within 24, Karen's face was a reaction gif. The comments were brutal. "Bridezilla meets Pepe Le Pew. This is why you don't colonize your neighbor's lawn. Justice is black and white and stinks to high heaven." But the real kicker came 3 days later when Karen tried to sue me. She showed up at my doorstep, hair still slightly crunchy from repeated tomato juice baths, with a lawyer who looked like he regretted passing the bar. "We're pursuing legal action for emotional distress, willful endangerment, and malicious sabotage," he announced, as if this were a Marvel villain monologue. I handed him a copy of my police report, security footage, and HOA property lines. You might want to read the part where she cut my fence and hosted an unauthorized gathering with over 80 guests, I said. Also, here's an invoice from my landscaper and koi specialist. He paled. Karen, behind him, turned a shade of green that didn't suit her. You're lucky I'm not suing for damages to the pond. I lost 3 koi. They left in silence. But the final nail came when the city sent out a zoning inspector. Not only did they confirm the event was illegal, they discovered that Karen had filed the permit paperwork using a forged signature, from none other than Marvin, our HOA president. The inspector turned the matter over to the district attorney. Marvin resigned. The HOA tried to distance themselves, but I had screenshots of the group chat, courtesy of my neighbor, revealing that they knew about the wedding and were mocking me for being too uptight. Now they were sweating bullets, especially since the city started investigating HOA fund mismanagement related to Karen's wedding rentals. Turns out some of those decorations were paid for with HOA discretionary funds, money meant for sidewalk repairs and community benches. The HOA board was formally dissolved pending further investigation. Karen became a local legend, for all the wrong reasons. Her husband-to-be filed for annulment citing psychological trauma and a breach of trust. His final words, according to mutual friends, I should have known better when she tried to bribe a skunk removal guy with a gift card to Cheesecake Factory. And me? I bought new lawn furniture, replanted my vegetable garden, added a few more gnomes, ones with cameras this time, and I installed a very clear sign next to my deck. Private property. Trespassers will be sprayed. You would think the trauma of a wedding-turned-biological warfare site would have been enough to end the saga, but when dealing with Karen, there is no such thing as a graceful retreat. She didn't vanish in a fog of humiliation like a normal person might after being publicly skunked and internationally memed. No, Karen doubled down. She didn't just want revenge, she wanted a clean rewrite of history. And apparently, in her twisted version of events, I had masterminded a terrorist act against her sacred nuptials, while she was an innocent damsel merely borrowing my lawn for love. The first sign she was back on her nonsense came in the form of glossy flyers left on every doorstep in our subdivision. They were printed in color, laminated, and titled, "The Truth Behind the Backyard Sabotage." The image on the front? Karen, mid-sob, mascara streaming, arms outstretched in what she probably imagined was a saintly posture, but in reality looked like she was trying to summon a demon. Inside the flyer was a narrative so warped it could have passed as satire. According to her version, she had graciously offered to include my backyard in her celebration as a gesture of unity, and I, out of bitterness and jealousy, had released a swarm of weaponized animals trained to attack on cue. She referred to the skunks as his domestic pets. She used the phrase emotional terrorism. She accused me of bioassault. And at the bottom, printed in bold, was a call to action. Support Karen's legal fight. Stop the neighborhood menace. Demand justice. I kept a copy. Framed it, actually. But it wasn't just laughable propaganda. She went further. She demanded an emergency HOA meeting to formally reprimand me and reverse the decision to dissolve the board. What she didn't realize was that Marvin, the disgraced HOA president, had already cut a deal with the city to avoid prosecution. In exchange for leniency, he handed over emails, text threads, budget records, and one truly glorious group chat message from Karen that read, and I quote, "Who cares if it's his yard? What's he gonna do? Call the squirrel militia." Turns out, not squirrels. Still, I showed up to that emergency meeting. Not because I cared about their opinion, but because I wanted to watch Karen crash and burn in person. The meeting was held in the clubhouse, which still smelled faintly of Febreze and passive aggression. Karen stood at the front like a defendant representing herself in a courtroom drama she didn't realize was already over. She tried to deliver a speech. It didn't go well. "Fellow residents," she began, "we have a crisis on our hands. Our community has been torn apart by lies, vengeance, and biological warfare. I have been wronged not just as a bride but as a human being. Someone snorted. And I believe we must restore order. Reinstate the HOA. Remove the individual who brought this neighborhood into disgrace. The room remained silent. Then Mr. Patel, who normally never says more than a polite hello, raised his hand and asked, "Karen, did you or did you not cut into someone else's property without asking?" Karen flinched. It was a mutual understanding. "No," said Mrs. Abernathy, the 83-year-old bulldog who ran the neighborhood bake sale. "You trespassed. And used HOA funds to pay for a cotton candy machine," Mr. Patel added. Karen's face twisted. "That was for everyone's enjoyment. There were kids crying and adults vomiting," someone else shouted. "And a man was chased by a skunk into my begonias," added Mrs. Abernathy. I didn't speak. I just sat in the corner sipping from my thermos, watching the dominoes fall. The motion to block Karen's proposed reinstatement of the HOA passed unanimously. Karen stomped out, knocking over a basket of scones on her way out the door. The next escalation came 3 days later, when I received a formal letter, delivered by courier, from a high-priced law firm. Karen was officially suing me for intentional infliction of emotional distress, destruction of wedding property, and reputational sabotage. She demanded $75,000 in damages, plus a public apology posted to my social media account. I responded by forwarding the letter to my lawyer, who chuckled, shook his head, and said, "She's trying to bluff. Let's counter." We did. Our countersuit included a full breakdown of property damage. Cut fence, destroyed koi pond, damaged trees, ruined flower beds, not to mention my traumatized cat who hadn't used the backyard since the invasion. We attached photos, receipt, police reports, skunk handler invoices, HOA chat logs. We even included a statement from Dave, the wildlife specialist, who confirmed the skunks were non-domestic and had been legally acquired and released in accordance with Municipal Code 4.16, subsection B, wildlife release in response to trespassing. Karen's lawyer withdrew within 48 hours. But the best part, the truly poetic twist, came from the internet. The video of the skunk wedding debacle had now passed 10 million views. It was featured on national talk shows, morning news segments, and a YouTuber with 17 million subscribers recreated it in a parody sketch titled "Love Stinks." Karen's image became a meme template. There was merch. Someone made a candle line called "Ode to Backyard Justice." The smell? Burnt roses and vinegar. Karen couldn't go anywhere in town without someone humming, "Here Comes the Bride," with a sniff and a laugh. She stopped leaving her house. Word spread that she was trying to sell her property, but no buyers wanted to be that close to ground zero. Meanwhile, the city moved forward with dissolving the HOA entirely and transferring oversight to a professional management company. No more Karen committees. No more fines for mismatched patio furniture. No more unsolicited complaints about lawn color. In place of the old HOA board, a new neighborhood advisory group was formed. Guess who they unanimously voted in as chair? That's right, me. I didn't campaign. I didn't ask. They just showed up one day with a petition and asked if I'd accept. I told them I'd do it on one condition. No more community events in anyone's yard without written permission. And no weddings unless the guest of honor could guarantee the absence of wildlife-related warfare. Everyone laughed. Except Karen. I imagine she was inside with her curtains drawn, clicking report on every meme of her face that popped up on Reddit. 1 week later, a moving truck showed up at Karen's house. She was gone before sunrise the next day. Left no note. Left half her garden gnomes. Left one tragic tulle wedding sash caught in a tree branch that fluttered for days like a warning flag. I kept it. Mounted it above my deck. Next to it, I posted a new sign. Private property. Trespassing may result in surprise guests. The skunks? Don't worry, they're fine. I had Dave return them to a local reserve. He even sent me a postcard from the drop-off site. Your soldiers performed admirably, it read. Consider them honorary marshals of neighborhood justice. I framed that too. And on warm evenings now, I sit on my reclaimed lawn, iced tea in hand, surrounded by flowers slowly coming back to life, and think about how close Karen came to taking it all. The land, the peace, the dignity. But instead of letting her steal it, I let nature return the favor. One puff at a time. You'd think that after being publicly humiliated, evicted from the HOA throne, and turned into a viral cautionary tale, Karen's saga would have ended quietly. Maybe she'd slink off to another neighborhood, maybe even change her name, start over somewhere far from skunks and shame. But no, Karen wasn't wired for that kind of self-awareness. Even after moving out, her legacy left behind a tangled mess of petty land feuds, legal residue, and, somehow, a final twist I never saw coming. Because while the main battle was over, the aftermath turned out to be a war of buried landmines, metaphorical and otherwise. About 2 weeks after the now legendary Skunk wedding, I received a letter from the county recorder's office. At first, I thought it was junk mail, another flyer for window tinting or tax consultants. But this one had an official seal and my full name on it. When I opened it, my eyebrows shot halfway off my face. Karen, in the dying gasps of her campaign against reason, had filed a boundary dispute claim on my property before she moved out. Not a real one, mind you. A bogus, speculative, and entirely fabricated claim that alleged the fence line dividing our properties was illegally placed and that several square feet of her historic garden area had been encroached upon for years, by me. It was the legal equivalent of a toddler screaming from the back seat that I'd stolen her armrest. And because the claim had been filed through a questionable online service right before she skipped town, the county was obligated to investigate it before dismissing it. Now, this normally wouldn't matter. It was clearly fake. But the investigation meant a temporary freeze on any structural changes to that part of the property. That meant I couldn't finish rebuilding my vegetable garden, which I had painstakingly replanted after it had been stomped into a romaine massacre during the wedding. So Karen's revenge, like a ghost fart, had lingered just long enough to sour the air again. I called my lawyer, who audibly groaned the second I said, "boundary dispute." He walked me through the steps: surveyor reports, documentation, photographic proof, title deeds. It was all solid. But the paperwork would take time. Weeks, if not months. "I know you're frustrated," he said, "but don't worry. The law's on your side. She's just making noise." "I'm used to that," I muttered. Her wedding had a bubble machine and a fog cannon. Still, I wasn't about to let Karen's last middle finger stop my progress. So I pivoted. Instead of replanting the garden, I turned the disputed area into something better. A memorial. That's right. I built a small wooden sign at the exact fence line she claimed was unlawfully built, with solar-powered spotlights and an engraved plaque. It read, "Here lies the memory of Karen's dignity, gone but not forgotten." Smelled, certainly. People laughed, took selfies with it. A local food truck even started parking nearby and selling skunk dogs on Saturdays. But the universe wasn't done delivering gifts. Because, as it turned out, Karen hadn't just sabotaged my land on her way out, she'd also overextended herself financially to fund her wedding. She'd maxed out 2 credit cards, taken out a personal loan using inflated HOA documentation, and then defaulted on all of it when her would-be husband backed out. And since she had moved quickly and quietly, she hadn't sold her house, she had mortgaged it again. A foreclosure notice hit the public records 2 months after she left, which meant the bank would reclaim the property and put it up for auction. I attended out of sheer curiosity. It was held at a modest government office with 10 people in the room, most of them real estate vultures sniffing around for quick flips. When Karen's house came up for bid, the room went silent. No one wanted it. The legend of the Skunk bride had tainted it like it was built on a cursed burial ground. I raised my hand. $1,000. Silence. The auctioneer blinked. Sold. Just like that, I became the new owner of Karen's house. To be clear, I didn't want it. But I did want the satisfaction. And I knew exactly what to do with it. I didn't sell it. I donated it to the local wildlife rescue and rehabilitation center. The house was repurposed as their new suburban outpost, a community education center focused on humane animal treatment, with an emphasis on skunks and raccoons. The backyard was turned into a demonstration habitat for nocturnal animals. They even built a little viewing area with benches and interpretive signs. I helped fund the renovations and made one small request, that the center be named the Karen Memorial Wildlife Center. They agreed. The sign went up 2 weeks later. The mayor came for the ribbon cutting. There was a skunk mascot in a bow tie. The news ran a story. The comments were glorious. I've never seen a more poetic ending. From backyard dictator to wildlife educator. Nature heals. Karen never came back. Rumors said she moved 2 counties over and changed her name. I doubted she could go anywhere without someone shouting, "Skunked," from a passing car. As for my neighborhood, life slowly returned to normal. Without Karen and her cronies running the HOA like a personal monarchy, things got quieter. Yards became more colorful. Garden gnomes flourished. Neighbors actually talked to each other again. And me? I became the unofficial local legend. Not the loud, brash kind, but the guy who pulled off the ultimate revenge without ever raising his voice. Who played the long game and won. People came to me for advice, or just to hear the full story in person. I never got tired of telling it. Every spring, I host a little block party. Not an HOA-sanctioned one, just neighbors hanging out. We roast marshmallows, grill, and pass around a carved wooden skunk statue we call the Spirit of Justice. It's ridiculous. It's perfect. And every year, someone inevitably points to the sign next door, the one on what used to be Karen's house, and says, "Hard to believe this all started with a wedding." And I just nod. Because in this world, there are 2 types of people. Those who ask permission, and those who think they're entitled to everything, including your backyard. And if you're lucky, and just a little bit vindictive, sometimes nature lends a paw. So here's to Karen. May she stay far away, may her new neighbors have strong fences, and may she never again mistake someone's lawn for her own personal runway. As for me, I'll be here, on my porch, drink in hand, watching the sun set over a backyard that is once again mine, and only mine. And if anyone ever tries to host a wedding on my lawn again, well, let's just say the shed's still there. And it's not empty. The plaque above it reads, "In case of emergency, pull rope." And that's how Karen's fairy tale wedding turned into a skunk-soaked legend. Justice was messy, but it smelled amazing. Eventually,